let's look at some numbers to better understand the impact of the Malthusian versus the Green Revolution. Right? So remember our Malthus hypothesis. Unchecked population will grow faster than food production. Now, across this time, population growth rate hasn't really decreased. Right? Population is growing faster, or at least it's kept growing. Okay, what the mistake or the error in terms of the Malthusian analysis is that the food production, right? Given the data available at the time, right, he never could have foreseen that food production could grow so much faster than population growth rate. Okay. Now, this has to do with productivity, increase in productivity of the farmers. So, for example, 1850s, 80 hours of labor is needed to produce 100 bushel of corn. Right? By 1996, the same 100 bushels reduced to just 2 hours. Right? That gives you an idea of the increase in productivity, 80 hours versus 2 hours. Okay. Now, the technique was developed in Mexico, but applied greatly in India and Pakistan in 1965. Okay. The technique is also adapted and applied greatly in China as well. And part of the China is the missing part of this story, right? The story of success. Okay? And just one of the main reasons is because China is a communist country, and the data has always been very hard to access by Western scholars. Right? And so, but now we're learning more about it because the country has begun to open up a little bit more. Although COVID has kind of reduced that or reversed that trend a little bit. Okay, but just looking at India and Pakistan, right? Look at the achievement here, right? It's in the short time. So this is just within 5 years, right? More than double, right? Wheat in Pakistan more than double, India more than double. Now, because productivity has increased so much, right? Less land is needed, and this is important in terms of one resource, right? Land is a fixed resource. It gets more expensive, right? And two, if you're not using the land for agriculture, then you're freeing that up to do other things. So land is freed up, right? To put it in perspective, right? To achieve the same production, right? Using 1950s technology, right? We would need to increase land by 1.8 billion hectares. Okay, so land is freed up. We can do other things with it. Also, labor is also freed up. Okay? If it were not for the Green Revolution and this mechanicalization of the agriculture system, right, most of you would be on the farm, right? You would not be here, and this is true for people around the world. Like they would not go to college, they would not get an education, right, to produce other things in the economy, right, to make people's life better, right? They would be on the farm, right? And so this frees up so much of the resource, right, and allow this rapid growth in the economy. Okay, now this is all good, and the traditional economists, right, will say this is the win for them. Okay, but is this sustainable? Now, as the video us mentioned, right, there's a cost to all this, right? So what was the driver, right? We didn't use more land. So instead, right, we use more fertilizer. Okay, so here's increasing fertilizer, and you notice the graph here, right? This is the cereal production, right? So the area harvested hasn't increased, production increased, but the rate of fertilizer is increasing much more, or has increased much more than the yield. Okay. Now, not just fertilizer, energy. Okay. So again, look at agriculture production. Okay. So over the past 50 years, we've been seeing a steady increase, right? And it's outpacing population. Okay. Right. This is the growth index, by the way. So looking at the growth, so this is a great graph to compare growth rate, right? Right, and gross domestic product has increased even faster, right? People are freed up, land is freed up to do other things. So people are producing other things, right? Life is all good, but this comes at a cost. Or what's the cost here? Energy use, right, has increased steadily, meaning that we are not being more efficient with energy. Right, we are putting in just as much energy. Increased production, meaning increase in energy use. Okay, so this should send up a red flag. Now, none of this is proof that it's not sustainable. Right, we have to be rigorous, but this should send up some red flag. And so the ecological economics or ecological economists are coming from this approach will say, well, here is an obvious physical limit. Right? So remember, ecological economics, right? The idea is that the economy is a subset of the biosphere and of the ecosystem. Okay? So there is no limitless growth. Right? You cannot grow unlimited because there are physical, ecological limits on economic growth. Right? So these are the limitations, and the focus here is on the input. Right? You need energy supply, which is limited. You need natural capital. Okay, so in traditional economics, we don't talk about natural capital. We just say capital, right? Because we can replace it, we can innovate, right? We can always innovate and invent new technology, right? But ecological economics, right, emphasize that all things must come from this natural capital. Right? And you need land, you need natural resources, right, to make things, right, to grow the economy, and those have a physical limit. Therefore, there is a limit on economic growth. Now, how can you replenish those natural capital? Well, through this environment's absorptive capacity, right? You can think of forest. The forest can absorb CO2, right, and grow lumber or produce lumber, right? However, that rate, right? That rate is limited. And so if you cannot grow faster than the ability for the environment to replenish itself. Okay. All right. A couple more graphs to kind of emphasize this idea of limited growth. Right? So we see this economic growth, and we see this high income countries, and this is a story that I think we're all pretty familiar with. Right? Even though living conditions are getting better for the middle income, right? Middle income and even the low income, right? The high income countries, right, benefited much more. Okay, for this. All right. This is GDP per capita. By the way, I know it looks really extreme, but if you take away the high income countries, right, then you can see this graph, right, will show a more positive story. Right. What I'm saying is the middle income and low income countries, right, also benefited a lot, right, in the recent decades, right? Just not as much, right, as the high income countries. Okay, but here let's look at the cost, right? What's the trade-off of this growth, right? There's many things we can look at, but one thing, right, that we're interested in is carbon dioxide emission. Right? And look at the emission here. So again, this is the high income countries, right? And we can see the contrast. Right? Or the parallel. High income countries, right? High economic growth, high carbon dioxide emission. Right? Lower economic growth, then lower carbon dioxide emission. Okay, so that's the trade-off. That's the trade-off of growth. Right? Oh, ecological. This is the picture for ecological economics. Right? We have the ecological economics introduced the distinction between capital stock and natural capital. Right, capital stock, that's the plants, equipment, right, that's stuff that helps with production. Okay, and in the traditional economics, there is just capital stock. There's no mention of natural capital. Okay, so ecological economics, right, emphasize on natural capital. Right, that's the fixed amount of land and resources. Right, that's this natural input that must be used to go into factors of production. Okay, and it paints this picture, this isolated picture, that the only energy coming in is solar energy, and the only thing leaving is this waste heat. And this is true. This is a physical fact. Right? And so that is the limit. Right? And the economic system pumps out this outputs, pollution, and waste. We require the environment, right, to take these pollution and waste and convert back into natural input in using the absorptive capacity of the environment. Okay, and is that rate, right, that limits the production, that limits growth in our economy. Right? Side by side, standard economics or traditional economics, right? No limits on the factor of production. Everything can be substituted. Right? All the resources can be replaced through technological investment. Ecological economics, is limited. Production is limited by the natural capital or natural input, and it can only be this natural input can only be increased through the absorptive capacity of the environment.